This is the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Podcast, Episode 46, What You Need to Know About Carbon Markets. I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason. Today, we'll explore carbon markets and how to find out information about them and how to use them on your farm. We'll begin our conversation by talking with a producer who already is involved in carbon markets. Jack McCormick lives and farms near Ellis Grove in Randolph County, Illinois. I asked him to tell me a little bit about his operation and the conservation methods he already uses.
I'm about 50 miles south of St. Louis, right near the Mississippi River, just a couple miles away from the Mississippi River. And we farm corn, wheat, soybeans. We've got some beef cattle and family farming partnership. My family's been here, I don't know, something like 80 years, I guess. I'm the fourth generation McCormick to farm here. And basically rolling hills of southern Illinois. It's not quite like central Illinois where you see for miles and miles. We've got lots of trees and little fields and that sort of thing. And it suits very well for conservation practices. We farm 100% no-till in all of our crops. My dad started no-tilling corn in 1970 before anybody really knew what that was or anything. And we've been 100% no-till since 1990. We have a lot of terraces. We got a lot of short, steep slopes, so we use some terraces along with the no-till. And I guess about 5 years ago, we started experimenting with cover crops to see if we could take what we're doing already with the no-till and those good practices and see if we can make things any better or not. And so far, we like what we see there.
Clearly, your family has been progressive in production and conservation practices. I know you're also interested in carbon markets. Why is that the case?
Well, that's kind of the latest thing to come along, and you can't hardly pick up a magazine or newspaper or anything like that and not hear something about carbon lately. And basically, they're kind of paying us to do some of the things that we're already doing. I figure if I'm willing to do a practice already and somebody can put a few dollars with that, I might as well look into that. If it's not overly burdensome on the paperwork side or the demands, if you can meet the demands that these programs are looking for. I'm also in the CSP program, which is kind of another thing where if you're wanting to do some conservation practices, they put a few dollars alongside of what you're wanting to do. And a few years ago, a couple bucks an acre was a really big deal. Now today, when corn is $7 and beans are 15 or better, somewhere in the teens. Maybe it's not as big of a deal as it was a few years ago, but still in all. And it kind of seemed to us a few years ago that, looking at the farm program, the way it was going, it seemed like everything was conservation minded. And if a person was going to be eligible for any federal dollars, it seemed like we needed to be looking that direction because that's very palatable to the public, to the taxpayers. If we're going to get some dollars, why we need to do some practice to justify those dollars, and we just seems like conservation. Well, it fits so well for what we farm anyway. Like I said, these rolling hills in southern Illinois, it's very productive soil, but it moves real easy. And if we don't do something to protect the soil that we have, they're not making any more. So we got to keep track of the soil we have. Farm it like, we want it to be around for a few years. So the carbon market, it just seemed like a logical direction for us to look to.
The CSP program you mentioned stands for Conservation Stewardship Program, part of USDA. Can you tell me about the carbon markets you are using? They're, of course, not part of USDA.
Yeah. So I guess 2021 was the first year that we looked into carbon markets. I guess starting in the fall of 2020 for the upcoming 2021 crop year, there's a lot of people in the carbon market, and we looked at two different programs. Seemed to be easiest to find information on and that sort of thing, and two different programs that kind of were going sort of different ways. They pay for carbon credits, of course, both of them. One of them was thinking they were going to stack on some programs and we would get some larger payments one day. Another one really was super easy to sign up for, easier than the first one. So I looked at two. I actually enrolled in two different ones at the same time, not on the same acre, of course. I put a few fields in one, a few fields in another. And the challenge seemed like, at least last year with the carbon programs, is everybody thought it was a good idea, but nobody really knew how to implement the programs yet. And some of the rules changed along the way, which made it a little somewhat difficult to actually just simply stay engaged or stay enrolled. I did everything on my end, and then the other folks seemed like on the other end were changing the rules as we went. And the other thing I found a little bit difficult to manage these programs is the idea of additionality, where if you've been doing something for a long time, that almost doesn't count. They're looking for new practices. Well, everybody gets to do a new practice once, and then it becomes an old practice for you. And that's what these programs are really after. So, if a person is looking to start cover cropping or start no-tilling, basically a new practice for that particular farm operation, really that's the time to you're a prime candidate for these carbon programs. If you've been doing something a long time, um, in a roundabout way, there's almost a penalty because you aren't a new practice anymore. So that was one thing that I had to look when I was looking at carbon programs. I mentioned, we've been no-tilling since 1990. Well, I don't qualify for anything for no-till. It's kind of strange. You'd think it might be the other way around, but it's not. But when we added the cover crops into our rotation, that's what I was going after to slip into the carbon programs with. And depends on how long you've been doing it, on which fields, and whether it's back-to-back years or every couple of years, or whether or not you fit into any one given program. So there is a lot of homework to do, really. Just simply reading. I know I've talked to folks at Illinois Corn Growers and Illinois Soybean Association, folks in the FS and GrowMark system, basically just asking questions. And when the subject comes up, my ears perk up. Who knows what about these programs, and gain as much knowledge as you can to see if and when it's right for you to jump in, basically.
Just a quick note that Marshall McDaniel, soil scientist from Iowa State University, mentioned no-till as it's related to not being paid for that good practice already in place. He suggested that over time, no-till captures about 1/2 ton of carbon per hectare per year, and then maxes out as the soils reach their capacity. Now, let's turn back to you, Jack McCormick. Do you have any advice for producers who are thinking about joining a carbon market?
Well, I would say you definitely do need to read the fine print. All of these programs do have a legal binding contract that you need to be aware of. I did not take mine to an attorney, but I've been told that I should have, and probably will in the future. It was the contracts I saw were verbiage that I think I understood. Of course, I am not an attorney by no means, by trade, but you just need to know, what happens if you have a wet fall and can't plant. What happens if you have a wet fall and you need to get some tillage equipment out to level out maybe some ruts you made, or just what happens if, that sort of thing. Are you, is it just simply that they won't pay you for that acre if you didn't plant it that year? I don't have a problem with that. If there's a penalty for back years, something like that, you need to know that stuff. A person certainly doesn't want to jump into a program and, trying to get a few dollars an acre and somehow would be jeopardized and have to pay a penalty back. That's not never a good day for a person. And then what practices are you interested in doing that will fit into a program? Not every practice fits into every carbon program. There's definitely different tenures of time to these carbon programs. And some programs have different tiers. Maybe it's a 5-year or a 10-year or a 20-year contract within the same program you can choose from. So a lot of due diligence on the farmer's part, but it certainly can be understood. There are many people participating. So it's not something a person can't overcome. You shouldn't be intimidated, but you do got to do your homework and know what you're getting into.
Again, that was Randolph County farmer Jack McCormick. On the note of understanding carbon markets and finding information related to them, we'll turn our attention now to Gene Brokish, who's the Midwest Program Manager for the American Farmland Trust. There she leads two watershed-based initiatives that are working with farmers to implement conservation practices to help maintain soil health and clean up water, and has a primary role to provide coordination to the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership. It's that second item we're interested in today as it relates to carbon markets. I asked Jean first to tell me a little bit about the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, what it is, and who the partners might be.
Yeah, so it's a Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, or oftentimes we abbreviate it as ISAP, is a group of 13 member organizations, all working collaboratively on sharing information, looking at research and on-farm data and messaging, all around and sharing resources with each other to build better capacity and understanding and make progress towards the nutrient loss reduction strategy. It was founded in 2016, 2017 timeline, really coincided with the release of the nutrient loss reduction strategy. And at the same time, there was severe budget cuts in the state of Illinois. And so it really just started by a group of 3 women who worked together and were friends. And they said, we need to collaborate better and share resources so we can accomplish all of this work. So current members include, there's commodity groups like Illinois Corn and Illinois Soybean Association. We have U of I Extension, Illinois Central College, so we have kind of an education piece. We have contractors associations through like Land Improvement Contractors Association and then the Ag Drainage Management Coalition. And we have a handful of conservation groups like Pheasants Forever, the Nature Conservancy, AFT is on it, of course, and then the Wetlands Initiative. And I might still be missing one there, but 1 or 2, but generally that's kind of a good representation of the members.
You all came together last summer to put forward a webinar or a series of webinars in the summer of 2021 about the ecosystem market. What exactly were the webinars about, and what is an ecosystem market?
So essentially an ecosystem market, or it's often called a carbon market, is it's a relatively new or growing. There's a lot of new attention and new discussion and focus on it. But it's like any market where there's somebody wants to buy something and another person has something to sell, and in this case, we're buying and selling the reduction of greenhouse gases. So there's a company or an industry that has a sustainability target, a climate goal, and they're looking within their own systems, can we cut enough carbon? Can we reduce enough greenhouse gases in-house? And if the answer is no, then they have to look outside and they look at these markets, and the markets are pairing them up with someone else or a project. Maybe that's on the farm where they're implementing practices, or maybe it's forestry work or whatever. The project is actually then reducing or capturing those greenhouse gases, and it's the transaction is what the market space is. And we got into this. We're not a market player in any form or fashion. We really got into this when some of the market representatives were contacting ISAP and contacting American Farmland Trust and saying, hey, we want to share information with your farmer networks. Can you give us a platform? And we basically were like, whoa, well, this is interesting. Something's happening here. And if we didn't want to just connect them with our farmers without understanding what the message was. And so we actually kind of decided we wanted to drive the bus, and we brought the different markets together, and we encouraged them to present the information in a way that was very tangible and transparent for the farmer audience. And so that's really what the webinars were about, was bringing these different market representatives all to the same table. They weren't doing their sales pitch. They were answering the questions we gave them around contract length, around terminology, verification, things like that. And we then also curated a bunch of information and some tables comparing the different market opportunities. And again, the idea was that we weren't there to sell or encourage farmers to do this. Our goal was to provide clear and understandable information so that farmers and farm advisors could evaluate these different opportunities and make a decision that whether it was going to be right for their farm or not.
Who are the players that participated, and has the player list changed since the webinars?
Well, we had a total of 5 webinars. The first one was actually in February, where we had Indigo Ag, NORI, Ecosystem Services Market Consortium, and then the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund. And those 4 entities are still very much active. They are more like they're like brokers. They're not selling the market or the credits themselves, but they're doing the matchmaking between the farmers and the corporations who wish to meet those climate goals. And then we had, in the summer, we hosted a series of webinars where we had some input providers. So we had Corteva, Bayer, and Nutrien. We also looked at data platforms. Those included companies that have some sort of technology that farmers might be using already. So like Land O'Lakes has their Truterra platform. Farmers Business Network has a platform called Gradable, and then there's SIBO. And those entities are adding some sort of carbon component to their data platforms. Then the corporations that we listened to or connected with, and really the purpose of that webinar was understanding some of the goals they've set and provide a context for these markets. So we had Cargill, General Mills, and PepsiCo. And then the last webinar in the summer series really kind of went beyond carbon, and we looked at broader ecosystem services. And we had a representative from Sand County Foundation and learned about the water quality credits. We had RIPE discuss their concepts for general accounting, all of the ecosystem services that are provided by a farm. And we also had a farmer from Arkansas who was the first in the country to actually sell carbon credits to a company. And so those perspectives were all really helpful. So to just illustrate kind of the bigger picture of where ecosystem markets may be going. And it's, while we often call them carbon markets, it's really, there's more opportunities beyond carbon if you're looking at the water quality, water quantity piece to it. And there's even some entities that are looking at habitat or biodiversity in their markets.
Yeah, so for those who are interested in watching those webinars, they can find them. Simply search for ISAP. Again, that stands for Illinois Sustainable Agriculture Partnership Ecosystem Markets. So ISAP and then Ecosystem Markets, and it should be the first thing that pops up. How much do you suppose has changed in the carbon market area since you put those together?
Well, it's a very dynamic landscape and marketplace. At that time, last summer or a year ago, some of the markets were still in pilot phases. And so those pilot phases might have had unique geographies they were looking at, or they had unique things that they were testing out to do payments on or to model and verify. And generally, they may have another pilot phase in another geography that might be similar, or they've expanded the geography. So they might be using a very similar type approach, but now it's available on a larger scale. The biggest thing that I think has changed is who's working with whom. There's a lot of partnerships that have formed where maybe Indigo Ag is also working with Corteva or Nutrien or something like that, where there's these different partnerships that have formed to work with farmers and create those projects that can enter the marketplace. There's also some new entities that have popped up. It seems like it's a very growing and dynamic marketplace right now. And it's something that I think it's important for farmers and farm advisors to be familiar with and understand the terminology, but also to approach it from a very kind of a scrutiny in terms of risk management, because it's relatively new. And so there's some unknowns in this space, and there's some important questions that farmers need to ask.
And finally, what advice do you have for farmers when they ask those questions? What should they be thinking about as it relates to the carbon markets and ecosystems?
I think the first thing is to be realistic and set realistic goals for themselves. Some of the market representatives were saying that there was a perception that you can make a lot of money doing this. That's not necessarily the case. And there's also, I think, a really important consideration for farmers is to understand that often these require a management change. And so are you prepared to do that? And what does that mean for your farm? There's also a significant record keeping component to participating in these markets. So understanding what that is and being prepared for that. Not many farmers I know really enjoy record keeping, so it can be a challenge or an obstacle for them. And then I think the last thing that I have really encouraged as I've been talking with farmers is if you're entering one of these, to make sure you read the contract and understand it, because it's a relatively new field and a new market space. Where there's not a lot of standards set yet. So the terms of the markets vary from one entity to another. And so really reading the fine print and understanding what you're committed to is really important to just help offset the risk.
Is there anything else?
Well, so I think farmers interested in looking at ecosystem markets could also or should also look at more of the traditional cost share incentives and payment incentives that are available through things like EQIP and CSP, because a lot of those payment rates through those programs are actually on par, if not a little better, than the ecosystem market payments are at this point in time. And they definitely have less risk. So I think it's a good way for farmers to increase their adoption of soil health related practices and be compensated for it. And I think there's also an opportunity you can actually stack the practices together, which then makes the management change and the record keeping more appealing for a farmer who's interested in making this shift and being part of the market space.
That was Jean Brokish of the American Farmland Trust. She's the Midwest Program Manager and joined us here on the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Podcast. This has been episode 46, What You Need to Know About Carbon Markets. The program was produced in conjunction with Illinois Extension Watershed Outreach Associate Rachel Curry. I'm Extension's Todd Gleason.